Hello and welcome to another Josh Plays for 40k painting tutorial. We're going to be adding another video to our series of Hormagaunts of the Hive Fleets, and today I'll be painting Hive Fleet Kronos, which again is a nice sort of black skin, but instead of the yellow carapace like with your Mungada, you've got a red striking carapace to go with that, and a sort of bluey greenish glow with the claws. So let's grab some brushes and get started. So the first thing I've done is built and sprayed the model with an undercoat of Chaos Black, and then immediately what I've done is I've gone over that skin again with a sort of heavy dry brush of Abaddon Black. This is just to give us a sort of even tone, so that if we do make any mistakes and we need to neaten up later, the Abaddon Black won't make a huge difference over the top of the Chaos Black, as they are slightly different tones of black. The first thing we're then going to move on to do is blocking in all the red carapace areas, and for this we're going to be using Mephiston Red, and this is just to pick out all the sort of carapace and armour areas over the top of the miniature here. Obviously do try and be as neat as possible, but if you do make any mistakes then obviously neaten up with Abaddon Black before moving on. Obviously not forgetting the head crest on the top either. Once you're happy with that Mephiston Red, we're going to move on to blocking in some more of the main colours. Now, the first step for this is a sort of two-stage. So, obviously, if you look at any artwork for Hive Fleet Kronos, you'll see that sort of vent areas on the skin. Obviously, the eyes themselves are yellow, but the vents are a sort of fleshy tone, sort of pinky tone to them. And for that, obviously, over black is quite a difficult colour to achieve, so we are going to, in the first stage, apply a lighter undercoat to that, and for that we're going to be using the Army Painter's Matte White. We're also going to be applying this to the eyes very gently, and also to the teeth, so that we can obviously block in and put some sort of tones on those. So you're going to want a very fine thin tip to your brush, as thin as you can, obviously the smallest brush you've got for your detail work, and so gently just sort of rub the brush over the tops of those areas. Obviously do bear in mind that this will likely go where you don't want it onto the skin, but that is why we do this so early on, so that we can neaten up again with Abaddon Black to make those areas obviously block in a little bit more. So don't be alarmed if it doesn't look all neat. As I say, as an example there on the small event, that has leaked around the edge. Obviously, as I say, don't worry if it does the same for yourself. Just neaten up afterwards. Once you're happy with that white in those vented areas, we are going to move on to the last of the base colours, which is Incubai Darkness, and this is for the claws areas of the model, obviously anything sort of underneath in the middle there with the claws, and then the sort of hoofs and feet as well. So work your way around. You'll probably find you'll want a couple of coats of this to obviously bring it out and make it nice and strong over the black undercoat, but if you just sort of apply a thin coat, then come back with another thin coat afterwards, and that should give you a nice strong colour. Once you're happy with that Incubai Darkness, we're going to move on to applying some shades to the model. There will be 4 sort of shading aspects altogether, but the first one we're going to start with is Agrax Earth Shade, and this is just to act as a recess shading to the red armour plated areas. So you don't need a lot on your brush, but you just sort of gently want to let it fall into the recesses and cracks of the armour around it, and then obviously that will apply a sort of darkening effect between the plates, rather than going sort of all over the flat panels and perhaps giving a sort of mottled effect, which is obviously not what we want. So just take your time. Obviously it shouldn't take too long, depending on how many models you're painting, but if you are sort of batch painting these models, it is a good idea to obviously do sort of one colour and one step at a time, That way by the time you reach the end, then the first paint on the model will be dry. The next shade we're going to then use is a contrast paint of Guilliman Flesh, and this is for the sort of vented areas in the skin, and we're going to be putting this on straight from the pot so that we get the sort of full effect of the contrast over the white. And we're just going to gently, without putting too much on our brush, drop that into the recessed areas of the white that we've painted on the arms and the legs. And then next up we're going to use Skeleton Horde contrast on the teeth and mouth area. Again, this is straight from the pot. You don't need too much on your brush when doing this, but just coat over the area that we left white for the mouth and the teeth. You may find, depending on how dark you want this to be, that you could apply a second coat of this to really sort of make it look sort of grubby and grimy. And then the final shade we're going to add in is a little bit of iodine yellow to the eye sockets of the model. Once you've let all those shades dry, we're going to move on to highlighting the model. And first of all, we're going to work on that black skin area. And the first paint we're going to be using is Etching Gray. And this is to pick out sort of any of the raised sort of muscle tone areas of the model. So like this part here on the arm, that we want to sort of be a bit more prominent, sort of bringing that up to the shoulder. And sort of generally sort of just blocking in any areas that are going to stand out when the light hits them. So do take your time to sort of work your way around the model and sort of pick these out. This is the sort of first of 2 highlights for the skin. So once you're ready, we'll move on. And then once you're happy with that Etching Gray, we're going to move on to a final highlight of Dawnstone. And this is just for the sharpest of edges around the skin areas. So sort of where it breaks around the sort of shoulders and the elbows here. Do take your time, work your way around the model, and then we can move on to highlighting the carapace. Once you're happy with how that skin is looking, we're going to move on to highlighting up the red carapace areas now. And the first paint we're going to be using is Evil Sun Scarlet, and this is really just to sort of brighten up that red again. So instead of sort of going straight in with a sort of feathering technique, we're going to sort of layer over the Mephiston red that we've already applied and shaded, and just sort of brighten that up. So sort of bringing the paint almost right up to the sort of recessed areas, just leaving a little bit of that shaded Mephiston red showing, and obviously brightening up that armour. Once you've applied that Evil Sun Scarlet, we're going to move on to a feathering highlight of Wild Rider Red. Again, obviously focusing on the carapace areas, just sort of bringing the paint sort of very gently in fine lines across the armour, just to pick out some of those sharper edges on the top here. Once you're happy with that Wild Rider Red, we're going to move on just doing a final edge highlight of Fire Dragon Bright on that red carapace, and this is just for the sort of raised edges of the armour, so this sort of middle cresting here for instance, and the same on the top of the head, as well as sort of working around the edges of the armour as well. Once you're happy with that red carapace, we can then move on to the final highlights of the claws and hoofs of the model. And first of all, we're going to be using Cavalite Green, and this is to sort of layer over the top of Incubai Darkness, just to sort of brighten up those claws a little bit. So obviously what you want a little bit on the brush, and sort of bring it sort of halfway up the claw, and just sort of layer that over the top of the Incubai Darkness. You may find sometimes you want to put a couple of thin coats over the top, depending on how sort of prominent you want this colour to be. But obviously try and leave the Incubai Darkness in the recessed areas, and certainly up near the top end of the claws where it meets the skin. Once you're happy with that Cavalite Green, we can move on to a final edge highlight of Gorse Blaster Green over those claws and hoofs, and this is just for the sharpest of edges of those particular areas. And there we have a finished Hive Fleet Kronos Hormagaunt. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions at all, just leave them in the comments below. I will come back to you. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.